بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. The chapter which we are going to look at in this week's lesson in Hadith is the chapter entitled in Arabic as Babu I'lan Nikah wal Khutbah wal Khitbah wal Shart. And the translation of this particular chapter is the chapter with regard to publicizing the nikah, I'lan Nikah. So it's a sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is that you should publicize the nikah, you should publicize the marriage, you should let everybody know, you should let people know that you are getting married or that you have got married. Because if you didn't tell anyone that you got married, and I mentioned in last week's lesson that there are two conditions which needs to be found for a nikah to be valid and correct. The first condition is that there has to be offer and acceptance, ijab and qabul. And the second condition is that it has to be done in the presence of two witnesses. So there can either be two males or one man and two women. Now just say for example, if you did do the nikah, say in front of a couple of people, in front of a couple of friends, in front of one person and two women, then if you didn't publicize the nikah, if you didn't tell anyone else, then what could happen is that somebody may see you with a girl, with a woman, and then they start having other kind of permutations in their head. They're thinking, okay, this person, why is he doing with a woman here? Why is he like in Asda, why is he visiting all these stores with this particular woman? And mentioned another hadith that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said, ittaqu mawadi'at tuham, which means that save yourself from places where people may make false accusation about you. Don't even go to those places. Where you think people may give an accusation or may make a false accusation about you, don't even bother going to those places. So just say for example, like somebody sees you coming out of a pub. Now you may be thinking, oh, I just went to a pub for an orange juice. I just went into a pub for a packet of crisps or peanuts. But they seen you out of the pub, what they're going to think? They think, oh, this person drinks alcohol. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said that don't go to places where you think people may accuse you of something, even though you may have gone for a halal purpose, but people are not going to think like that. So exactly here as well, that when it comes to nikah and marriage, publicize it, make people aware that you have got married or you intend to get married, so that if they do see you with a woman later, a couple of months' time, they don't then have second thoughts or they don't even have bad thoughts about this particular woman. So that's one thing which we're going to read in this particular chapter. The second word in this chapter is the word khutbah. Now this word can be read in two ways. Either you can read it with dhammil kha, khutbah, which in this context will then mean that before you say the offer and acceptance, before you say the ijab and qabul, it is a sunnah to say a khutbah or a sermon, and in this particular khutbah you will recite verses from the Holy Quran with regards to nikah. You will recite certain ahadith which the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has mentioned regarding nikah and marriage. So that's one way you can read this word, the word khutbah. Or you can read it khitbah, with the kha underneath the kha, i.e. a kasra, which in this context will then mean the chapter with regards to proposals, how to propose to a woman. If, say, for example, somebody else has already proposed to this particular woman or girl, then we're going to look at the hadith, then you should not propose in that situation. And the third thing which we're going to look at under this particular chapter is shart. And shart basically means placing conditions in nikah, placing conditions in marriage. And a good example of these conditions, it's like basically conditions where either the boy or the girl place in the nikah for their own benefit, for their own advantage. And a good example of that will be like, say, for example, the boy may say to the girl that, okay, I want to get married to you, but the condition is I don't want you to work. Or like, for example, the girl or the girl's family may say to the boy or the boy's family that, okay, we'll give our daughter, but the condition is that we want her to remain in her hometown. Or if she's from Birmingham, so they'll say, okay, we want her to stay in Birmingham. The groom may be from London, but they'll place a condition that we want the girl to stay in Birmingham, we don't want her to move to London, we don't want her to move to Manchester, we don't want her to move to Newcastle, and so on and so forth. So these are known as shart, conditions placed in the nikah, and inshallah we'll read the hadith later, and I'll mention thereafter what is basically the status of placing such conditions in the nikah. It's quite common nowadays, people place these kind of conditions that, alright, we'll give our daughter, but the condition is that, or she wants to continue with a degree, or she wants to continue working, or she has to stay in Birmingham, or she has to stay in London, or she has to do this, she has to do that. So what effect does it have, if any, on such a marriage? So inshallah we'll read that later. Now the first hadith which we're going to look at is a very famous hadith which can be found in Sahih al-Bukhari, narrated by the female companion called Rubayy bint Muawwidh bin Afrah. Now she narrates that جاء النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم, that Rasulullah صلى الله عليه وسلم once came, فدخل حين بني علي, which means that Rasulullah صلى الله عليه وسلم entered the house where she and her new husband were staying. Basically the new husband, the newlywed, so their home, their apartment, their abode, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam came to see them. The hadith then goes on to say, فَجَلَسَ عَلَى فِرَاشِكَ مَجْلِسَكَ مِنِّي, that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam came, he then sat on the same duvet, on the same mattress on which I, i.e. the female companion Rubayy bint Muawwidh, was sitting on, and then she says, كَمَجْلِسَكَ مِنِّي, the same way you are sitting in front of me. Now here the word you is referring to one of the narrators of the hadith, i.e. the Tabi'i, the predecessor, whose name is Khalid bin Zakwan. So Rubayy was narrating this hadith to Khalid bin Zakwan, and she's saying to him that, look, the same way you are sitting right close to me, this is how Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was sitting next to me on that particular day. Which then leads to an automatic question. And the question is that, as I mentioned before many weeks ago, regarding the impermissibility of khalwa, seclusion between a man and a non-mahram, between a man and a strange woman. I mentioned the impermissibility of intermingling, interaction with a strange woman, i.e. women who are unlawful for you shouldn't be intermingling and interacting with them. Now in this hadith here, it tells us that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was sitting on the same duvet, on the same mattress as Rubayy bint Muawwidh, and it's mentioned in the books of hadith that there is no kind of relation between Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and Rubayy bint Muawwidh, which then leads to the question that how come Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was sitting right next to a woman? We mentioned before that you shouldn't be intermingling sitting next to a woman, but in this hadith here, it tells us that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was sitting next to a strange woman. Now the reply or the answer or the reconciliation given by the scholars of hadith, the muhaddithin, is number one, that this particular incident happened before the ruling of hijab, before those ahadith which came with regards to seclusion, with regards to the impermissibility of intermingling, before the rules of hijab came about, this particular incident happened. Because the rules of hijab in particular came about quite later on in Islam. In particular, it happened during the nikah, during the marriage, when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam got married to Zainab bint Jahsh radhiyallahu anha, and then when he invited, as mentioned in the hadith of Sahih Muslim, invited the whole Medina Munawwara to participate in this particular walima. So it's mentioned that people then started coming to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's house. There was no ruling of hijab and parda. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam felt uneasy that all these people are coming. They're not leaving Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's house. Also, it's mentioned in another hadith of Sahih al-Bukhari that Sayyidina Umar bin Khattab anhu coming to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, saying to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that, good people and also immoral people come and visit your wife. It would be good if there was a rule with regards to hijab. Thereafterwards, the verses and the rulings with regards to hijab came about. So what we can say, the first reply is that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam sitting quite close to Rubay bint Muawwid is an incident which happened before the rulings of hijab. That's one reply. And the second reply, or the best reply which we can give, is that our belief, and our belief here meaning the belief of the Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, is that all prophets, all Anbiya alayhi salatu was salam, they are ma'soom, they are sinless, and they cannot even contemplate doing a sin, let alone committing a sin. Anbiya alayhi salatu was salam, Rasuls and messengers, they cannot even contemplate committing a sin. Sometimes there may be a person who's pious, who's religious, but sometimes what could happen is that he may here and there think about committing a sin, or he may get this desire in his heart regarding a particular sin. But then what happens is that because he's very close to Allah, he's very pious, he's very righteous, he then refrains from that particular sin. But when it comes to prophets and when it comes to Anbiya alayhi salatu was salam, Allah has made them such that inherently they cannot commit a sin and they don't even contemplate or think about a particular sin. So this is the beauty, and this is how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created prophets and messengers. And even when we look through Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's life, the seerah in particular, you'll see that the scholars have mentioned that even though before the age of 40, so even though Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam wasn't a prophet at that time, he at that time was still considered to be very pious and very righteous, or if you want to use the technical word, he was still a wali of Allah before prophethood. And what I'm trying to say is that before prophethood, prophets and anbiyas, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala keeps them away from sins and keeps them away from bad things. And it's mentioned in the hadith that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, before he received prophethood, he never ever worshipped an idol. He knew worshipping idols was wrong. Even though people around him, the pagans of Makkah, they were worshipping idols left, right and center, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam knew that this was something wrong. Even Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam made alcohol haram upon himself. Even though there wasn't a legal ruling at that time, but Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam knew the disadvantages of alcohol, knew the evil effects of alcohol, he made it haram upon himself. And this is not something specific with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Even when we look through the nizam and the sunnah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the way he runs this world, whenever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chooses people for his work and for his deed, so it could be either prophets, or if you want to use our example, say great shuyukhs, great scholars, great preachers, great imams, if you were to read their biographies, you'll read that when they were growing up, when they were young, they'll tell you themselves that bad things of society, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala kept them away. You never read a biography of a great sheikh when he says that when he was growing up he was a drug dealer, or he had girlfriends, or he was a habitual fornicator. You never read that. Why? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the way he chooses, the way he builds a great sheikh or a great imam is that from his young age, Allah keeps him away from bad things. Allah keeps him away from sins. Allah keeps him away from adultery. Allah keeps him away from alcohol. Allah keeps him away from idol worshipping. And even when we look through the seerah again, if you were to read the biography of Abdul Muttalib, the grandfather of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, it's also mentioned that when he was growing up, because he was also a very pious person, by the way, a very righteous person, he also stayed away from idol worshipping, and he also made alcohol and khamr and gambling and these kind of things haram upon himself. So this is how the dunya and the world works. Special people who Allah chooses for his deen, for his work, he keeps them safe from bad things, from immoral things, from gambling, from alcohol, these kind of things, from a very young age. And Allah has to do that, by the way, because when you look at it, just say, for example, Nauzubillah, summa Nauzubillah, just say Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam before prophethood was involved in bad things. Now, if Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam wanted to preach and he wanted to go to a person and say, oh, believe in Allah, do this, do that, people will say, oh, why should we believe in you? Before you were an idol worshipper, you were this, you were that, why should we listen to you? And even to a certain extent, it happens to us as well, that we try to, give da'wah to someone, we try to encourage a brother to come to the masjid, and he'll say, oh, well, 10 years ago you used to deal drugs with me, or 10 years ago you had this, you had that, 10 years ago you used to gamble, 10 years ago you drank alcohol, I saw you used to go to nightclubs, used to do these kind of things, and then what happened, they use that against you. And then you try to give them da'wah. They shouldn't use that, by the way, against you, but you try to give them da'wah, but they'll say, oh, you were like this, you were like that. So, but as I was saying that, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chooses someone for his deen, for his work, he keeps them safe from bad things, from the ill of society, from a very young, early age. So that was the second reply briefly, was Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had made Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam ma'soom in terms of sinless, in terms of even if he was next to or interacted with a woman, there was no way that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam could contemplate doing anything bad. And another reason why, again, I mentioned this a couple of weeks ago, that we as humans have two companions with us. A companion from the angels and a qareen and a companion from the devils. And what happens to you and I is that we get the good companion telling us to do good things, come into the masjid, do this, do that, give sadaqah, read Quran, read salah, read nafal prayers and so on. And then unfortunately we then have a qareen from the devil who then tells us, oh no, don't read Quran, don't give sadaqah. We try to pray salah, he then puts doubts and insinuation. He then says, oh well, after salah you need to do this, you need to go shopping, you need to do this, you need to do that. You got work to do, you got this to do, you got that to do. So this evil companion which we have, that's always encouraging us to do bad things. But I mentioned the hadith before that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's evil companion which he had, that has now became a Muslim, for aslama. So basically Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam got two companions with him, two qareens with him. One was from the angel, who's always going to be giving good things, and then a companion which was from the devil, but he has now converted to Islam, and that is always encouraging Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam to do good things. Hence, what we can derive is that it's not possible for Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam to ever contemplate doing something bad or doing something wrong. Now, let's go back to the hadith here. So, it tells us that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam sat next to this particular woman, Rubay' bint Mu'awwid. Now listen to this next part of the hadith. Then he goes on to say, فَجَعَلَتْ جُوَيْرِيَاتٌ لَنَا يَضْرِبْنَ بِالدُّفْ. There were some young girls, Juwayriyat, and they were banging the duf. I'll explain the duf in a second. So they were banging and they were hitting the duf. وَيَنْدُبْنَ, and they were praising, like they were basically singing nasheed, they were like praising, Man kutila min abai yawma badr, those who were martyred from their forefathers during the battle of Badr. Is qalat ihdahunna, when one of the girls then said, so they were just saying good things about those who lost their lives in the battle of Badr, i.e. the Sahabas. Then one of them then said, وَفِينَا نَبِيٌّ يَعْلَمُ مَا فِي غَدْ. One of them just said, we have a prophet who knows what's going to happen tomorrow. يَعْلَمُ مَا فِي غَدْ, i.e. what she's trying to say is that we know a prophet who's got alimul ghaib, like he knows what's going to happen tomorrow. Then what did Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam do? فَقَالَ دَعِي هَذِهِ. He then stopped this girl and he said, don't say that. وَقُولِي بِالَّذِي كُنْتِ تَقُولِينَ. But say what you were saying before. Now we'll come back to the last part of the hadith later. Now the first point which I want to mention here is with regards to nasheeds, Islamic nasheeds or poetry and so on. What does Islam say with regards to that? Now firstly, the scholars have mentioned that it is permissible for Muslims to recite poetry and also to listen to poetry. Poetry, nasheed, they like to say. To listen to poetry, to listen to nasheed, to even say nasheed, to even say poetry is permissible as long as the subject of the poetry is not vulgar or is not indecent and is not something which is un-Islamic. So as long as the words from the poem is correct, there's nothing immoral about it, it's nothing to do with, say, love and these kind of things, it's not indecent, it's not vulgar, and also it's not something which is against the principles of Islam, then to recite that or to listen to that is permissible and that is allowed. And from this we can understand is that these kind of nursery rhymes, which, sometimes the kids are taught at school, as long as the subject or the topic of the nursery rhyme is not un-Islamic and is not something indecent or vulgar, then to recite that or for the kids to learn it, then that is something which is not impermissible but something which is allowed and something which is permissible. So I'm not sure, like for example, certain nursery rhymes, it's been a while since I've been at school, but whatever they sing, Twinkle Twinkle Little Star or something like that, these kind of things. So as long as the topic or what they're saying is not something un-Islamic and is not something like haram or is not something indecent or it's not talking about love and these kind of things, then for someone to read that, for someone to recite that or for someone to listen to that, then that is something which is permissible and allowed. And there are ahadith which can be found in Sahih al-Bukhari where it's mentioned that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the companions in particular during the Battle of Khandaq. The Battle of Khandaq, a very famous battle where the Muslims were digging trenches. So it's mentioned that when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam saw how exhausted and hungry the companions were, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said these words in a poem, "O Allah, there is no life except the life of the hereafter, so forgive the Ansar and the Muhajirin." And then the companions then said, responding to that we are the ones who have pledged allegiance to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and we will do battle for as long as we live. So that phrase which Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said and what was replied by the companions, that in a way is actually a nasheed. That's like a poem and so on. So what we can derive is that to recite nasheed, these kind of things, is permissible and allowed. Which then takes me on the next part. Can we listen to nasheeds which are accompanied with what we call dufs? Now, what is a duf? Duf is, there's two opinions. One is, it's one of those one-sided drums, which you've probably seen in weddings. Okay? Like you've probably seen like when the groom is coming out or when the bride is coming out. So you get some people and they're kind of hitting the drums and so on. You call them dufs. And then there's another opinion, is that a duf is like a large-sized frame drum. So it's like one of those. And it's got like some cymbals around it. And it just makes a kind of rattling noise when you kind of shake it together. So there are two opinions with regards to the duf. Now, can you play a duf? Like, can you just play, just say, for example, somebody singing a nasheed or a poem, can you actually accompany that with some beats from a duf? Now, with regards to that, there are differences of opinions. Some scholars have said that it is totally impermissible. Some have said that it is totally permissible. Imam Abu Yusuf rahmatullah alayhi, one of the students of Imam Abu Hanifa rahimullah, he's of the opinion that it is permissible to play the duf on joyous occasions, and it should only be played by little girls, as mentioned in the hadith, Juwayriya, young girls. And joyous occasions such as weddings, such as the two Eids, or when something beautiful or something has happened, special has happened, like a birth of a child, then in joyous occasions to play the duf, then that is permissible and that is allowed. Now this takes me on to the ruling that can nasheed, can it be played or can it be accompanied with dufs or not? What is the ruling with regards to that? Now to tell the truth, because there's difference of opinions, it's best that nasheeds are not accompanied with duf. So when somebody is saying a nasheed, or if a nasheed is being played, then it should not be accompanied with a duf. However, if somebody has accompanied it with a duf, so there is like duf beats in the background, then you can listen to it. So it's permissible to listen to it, although preferable that you don't. And it's similar to what I mentioned last week, something which we call fatwa and taqwa. So fatwa, our ruling is that yes, fair enough, you can listen to it. However, taqwa and piety says that you don't do it. And I gave a comparison with regards to meat. So just an example, like a Muslim is selling meat, but it's not HMC. So obviously, proper taqwa and piety is that, yeah, you should consume HMC meat. However, fatwa, if you want to look at it in terms of ruling, because he's a Muslim and he's selling you meat, then obviously we shouldn't doubt it. And obviously it will be permissible for you to take it and utilize and eat it. Okay, but obviously taqwa, your piety says that no, you should like go for 100% halal, if that makes sense. So exactly as well that ruling, if you look at it in terms of ruling, fair enough, you can listen to nasheeds which have duf beats in the background. However, it's preferable that you don't listen to it. Now remember, the only flexibility is with regards to duf beatings in the background. It is totally unlawful and haram to have nasheeds or Islamic poetry with music in the background. There's a difference. Duf is like the either using the one-sided drum or the frame drum. So flexibility regarding that. However, to have music in the background, you have like someone playing the piano in the background, or someone with the trumpet or the violin, and then you have Islamic nasheed, that is totally unlawful, that is totally haram. And this is something which is very, very important, because unfortunately I'm not sure where people get this from, but sometimes when you speak to them they say that, oh well, such and such a scholar said this. If you were to take it back, say 10 years ago, you ask someone, what's your opinion on music? Even though he was, say, non-practicing, he would still say, you know what, music is haram. He probably, in his heart, he knew that it's haram, it's unlawful, he shouldn't listen to music, but because unfortunately he's not practicing, he's listening to himself, but he knows that it is unlawful and haram. Nowadays, if we were to ask anyone, what's your view on music? Just if we were to ask them randomly, they'll say, oh well, Egyptian scholars say it's permissible, Tunisian scholars say it's permissible, Moroccan scholars say it's permissible, Chinese scholars say it's permissible, Russian scholars say it's permissible. Just come out with next level countries and say, oh, these scholars say it's permissible. However, when you look at the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the words of the Holy Quran, we can clearly derive that music is something which is unlawful and haram, and it will remain unlawful and haram until the day of judgment. Now, I don't want to go into too detail here because it's a topic which scholars have actually written books on that. Okay, we don't even have time to look at it and go into detail, but I'll just mention a couple of evidence, one from the Quran, one from the Hadith, where we can derive the impermissibility of music and musical instruments. Now, the Quranic verse which is used with regards to the impermissibility of music is the verse which can be found in Surah Luqman, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمِنَ النَّاسِ مَنْ يَشْتَرِي لَهْوَ الْحَدِيثِ لِيُضِلَّ عَنْ سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ بِغَيْرِ عِلْمٍ. That there are some people who buy lahwa al-hadith so that they can divert liyudilla people from the straight path bighayri ilm, without knowledge. Now the scholars of hadith, the scholars of the Holy Quran, i.e. the Mufassirin, and great companions such as Sayyiduna Abdullah bin Mas'ud anhu, who it's mentioned in the hadith of Sunan al-Tirmidhi narrated by Mu'adh bin Jabal anhu, who has said that when Mu'adh bin Jabal, when he was passing away, he said that take knowledge from 4 people. And the 4 people he narrated or mentioned were: number 1, Uwaymir Abu Darda; number 2, Salman Farsi radiallahu anhu; number 3, Abdullah bin Salam radiallahu anhu; and number 4, Abdullah bin Mas'ud radiallahu anhu. So Abdullah bin Mas'ud is a top scholar, is a great scholar, a great Sahabi, known as the Abadalah, known as someone who is well known for his ilm and his ijtihad, for his knowledge and for his deriving rulings from the Quran and from the Hadith. Now Abdullah bin Mas'ud anhu's tafsir of the word lahwa al-hadith is, lahwa al-hadith here means musical instruments. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala here, he is actually ridiculing, or he's actually telling us the bad things which the pagans of Makkah did, and that was that they would buy musical instruments so that they can divert people from the straight path. And I'll just mention one other hadith. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, the hadith of Sunan al-Tirmidhi and Sunan ibn Majah, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said that before the end of time, before Qiyamah, before the day of judgment, this is what will happen. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said that the earth will swallow people up. So this earth which we are living in, like pavements and so on, sometimes if we do so much sins, that what will happen, the earth will actually take these people, swallow these people up, and these people will actually totally disappear from the face of the earth. Similarly, before the end of time, before day of judgment, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has also predicted the transformation of some people into animals. People, human beings, they'll turn into monkeys, they'll turn into swine, they'll turn into pigs, they'll turn into rats. And it has happened. Don't think that this is far-fetched and I'm watching too much cartoons and so on. I'm not watching cartoons. This is something which will happen. And there have been stories that people who committed so many sins, in particular, I heard 10 years ago, this actually, somebody was telling me in Brazil that there was actually an area there in Brazil that was well known for adultery, well known for fornication. What happened? They woke up one day, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala turned them into pigs and swines and monkeys. So it can happen. So this will happen, and it will happen quite a lot. Frequently it will happen. People will transform into pigs. People will transform into swine. People will transform into monkeys and rats before the end of time. Rasulullah is predicting that. And also people will be rained upon with stones. The stones will come from the sky. So the companions asked Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that, when will this happen? When will this happen? So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam replied by saying, when female singers and musical instruments appear, and when alcohol will be commonly consumed. When these things happen, what will happen? Azab will start coming to the people on this earth. And we see this nowadays, female singers, look how common it is. Musical instruments, look how common it is. And we're talking about, just forget about other people. Let's look at ourselves. Even in our homes, Muslim homes, there's someone I know, he was telling me that in his brother's house, he's a Muslim, he's got piano there, he's got guitars there, he's got violins there. So we're talking about people in Birmingham. We don't have to go somewhere else. We're talking about people, Muslims living in Birmingham. They got pianos, they got violins and guitars at home. They play that. They send their children for music lessons, how to learn how to play the guitar, learn how to play the piano. So when these things started becoming common, and also when alcohol is drunk openly, and we see, again, we don't look at anybody else, look at our own Muslims, drinking alcohol openly, when that will happen, then these azab and these punishments will come. So what we can gather, I said I don't want to go into detail here, but what we can gather is that music is something which is unlawful and haram. And if nasheed or poetry is being played with music, then that will automatically, even though the nasheed is something good, it will actually automatically make the nasheed unlawful and haram. And unfortunately what we see nowadays is that many of these nasheeds, and when we look at its total disrespect, it's got Allah's words there, it's got words of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they're saying Allah, Allah, you know these kind of nasheed, and in the background someone's playing the piano. That is even worse than just normal music. Because now what you're doing is that you're using Allah's name. It's like a nasheed they're saying, and there's no, I don't want to say any nasheed artist's name, but you just do a search on YouTube, you'll find out who they are. They're saying nasheed, they're saying Allah's words, they're saying Subhanallah, Alhamdulillah, they're using Allah's words, they're using Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, love for Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they're using these kind of phrases, and in the background they're playing their guitars, they're playing their pianos, they're playing everything. And then they're saying, oh, this is nasheed. And this is, we're praising Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we're praising Allah. You continue doing that, what will happen is that azab will come from Allah, like I mentioned in the hadith of Tirmidhi and Ibn Majah. When these things happen openly, the azab and the punishment will come. Just very quickly, the last part of the hadith before we finish. As I was saying that these young girls, they were praising Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and they were talking about those who were martyred in the Battle of Badr. Then one of them then said, وَفِينَا نَبِيٌّ يَعْلَمُ مَا فِي غَدٍ, that we have a prophet amongst us who knows what's going to happen in the future. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam then said to this girl not to say that. And what we can derive from this last part of the hadith, again I'm not going to go into detail, is that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam does not have knowledge of the unseen and what's going to happen tomorrow. Remember, only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows what's going to happen tomorrow. Okay, what we're going to do tomorrow, what time we're going to wake up, how much we're going to earn, whether actually we're going to be alive tomorrow, by the way. That's another thing. Only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows. So all these things Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows. No prophet, no Rasul, no wali, no saint of Allah knows this. Only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows that. And this is what Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was trying to correct this particular girl, that don't say that we have a Nabi who's going to know what's going to happen tomorrow. Only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows. And then you may argue and say, well, there are some ahadiths where he talks about Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam predicting the future. Predicting the future, what Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam predicted, he predicted not by his own self, but the wahi or the revelation came from Allah to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and then Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam then predicted what's going to happen in the future. But it wasn't done individually by Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. May Allah give us tawfiq to everyone who's said, wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillah.